Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest with Legionaries of Christ, and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the Star Christ Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 332, and we're covering Gaudium et Spes 51 on the modern world interfering with marriage. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about how marriage is ordered to children and spouses have duties to their children. Today, we continue chapter 1 of part 2, Fostering the Nobility of Marriage in the Family. And the summary today is that there may be times to avoid kids, but we need to protect the lives of the tiniest humans. So a very strong pro-life, anti-abortion message in the second half today. We begin with a note today. One of the things that was discussed at the council, but no document was posted on, was contraception. This was a discussion point of several of the earlier sessions, but Paul VI, who was Pope at the time, said that he would take care of it. He held it to himself and asked the Council of Fathers not to pronounce on it, and they trusted him and didn't pronounce on it. A few years later, so about 1968, the Council ended in 1965. 1968, we have Humanae Vitae, which, if you follow Catholicism, is one of the more controversial documents in the last 60 years. It's a little over 50 years now. Super important document, but it is debated and highly contested. It condemned the use of artificial birth control like pills and things like that. This paragraph gets into these kind of themes, and I thought it was just worth noting that it kind of avoids ever directly talking about hormonal birth control and things like that. It's not avoiding it because there's no church teaching. It's avoiding it because the council decided we are going to leave this for the Pope to write about soon. So the two parts we'll read today, 51A and B, are about the modern world, can indicate we shouldn't have children for a time, but we can't use illicit means to avoid kids. Then the second half, C and D, is we must guard conception. We must guard life from conception and not use illicit means to prevent life. A note about A and B as well second note before we actually get to the text today. There arises the word here today, intimacy. In English, intimacy is almost always a euphemism for sexual activity or sexuality. In Latin and Romance languages, it's not necessarily the same. It often refers to a deep friendship and a spiritual or familial closeness that is appropriate for married couples, even if times they're not having sexual relations with each other for various reasons. It's important to note this because the interpretation of this text can vary based on how you understand intimacy. So now, with what I think is the longest introduction before we got to the text so far in 300 plus days, let's get to A and B on the modern world can indicate not having children for a time, but we can't use illicit means to avoid children. A. This council realizes that certain modern conditions often keep couples from arranging their married lives harmoniously, and they find themselves in circumstances where at least temporarily the size of their family should be increased. As a result, the faithful exercise of love and the full intimacy of their lives is hard to maintain. But where the intimacy of married life is broken off, its faithfulness can sometimes be imperiled and its quality of fruitfulness ruined. For the upbringing of the children and the courage to accept new ones are both endangered. B. To these problems, there are those who presume to offer dishonorable solutions indeed. They do not recoil even from the taking of life. But the Church issues the reminder that a true contradiction cannot exist between the divine laws pertaining to the transmission of life and those pertaining to authentic conjugal love. These two subparagraphs start by noting the challenges that many couples have today. There are a lot of economic situations that create challenges for couples. Oftentimes, the husband might have to go and look for work in another country. In the United States today, it's very hard for a young couple in their 20s or early 30s to buy a house so they can settle down. They end up renting an apartment and they're not sure having more than one kid in an apartment seems a little tight and things like that. And that's a challenge. Other times you have other reasons that are valid with economics and the situation of the world to delay having children. There are several jobs where you need a certain number of years of experience, and then you get a perpetual certificate or a lifetime certificate, permanent, whatever you want to call it. And with that permanent certificate, you can take a decade off, stay at home, be a stay-at-home mom while your kids are in school, and then go back to work part-time or something like that. I know two young couples at least two, where the mom was a teacher and that was required for teaching. And so they didn't have kids immediately after they got married, waiting for the mom to have her perpetual teaching certificate. So then once she had that, she could then teach part-time or full-time once her kids went back to school. And that's important, not to be judgmental of such couples, because I know in Catholic circles, there could be a tendency to be, why aren't these couples having more kids? Or they got married, where are the kids coming? There could also be discrimination against couples who struggle with that. I know several couples who have had fertility issues, and they felt somewhat judged by a lot of the people there. So that's the situation. And the situation is also that this lack of sexual activity can stretch other modes of intimacy, other modes of marital friendship. We can have that danger in marriage where the one is just in it almost just for the sex, or the one is delaying kids for selfish motives, just so, hey, I want to have more money and everything else. There is a fine line between, okay, I need to save a bit of money so I can afford to take off from work until my kids are in school, and I want to have tons and tons of money so I could, just get the most money and things like that. And that's a challenge. Each couple is responsible, as we noted yesterday, for deciding this for themselves, but that's important to think about. Now, ultimately, at the end, we can't abort children after they're conceived for this purpose, right? That's the most obvious, I think, as Catholics. But I think because of people, people think about that, we need to be very clear about that. So, moving on to our second half for today, paragraphs 51C and D, and they talk about how we must guard life from conception and not use illicit means to control birth. You might think, wait a second, you said at the beginning, we're not talking about birth control. Well, the question that was discussed a lot was kind of the hormonal birth control, the birth control pills we have today. Barrier methods or other forms of birth control were known, and here it explicitly avoids defining what is illicit birth control, leaving that to the Pope to decide, which he did in Humanae Vitae. So let's get to the text. C. For God, the Lord of life, has conferred on men the surpassing ministry of safeguarding life in a manner which is worthy of man. Therefore, from the moment of its conception, life must be guarded with the greatest care, while abortion and infanticide are unspeakable crimes. The sexual characteristics of man and the human faculty of reproduction wonderfully exceed the dispositions of lower forms of life. Hence, the acts themselves which are proper to conjugal love, and which are exercised in accord with genuine human dignity, must be honored with great reverence. Hence, when there is question of harmonizing conjugal love with the responsible transmission of life, the moral aspects of any procedure does not depend solely on sincere intentions or on an evaluation of motives, but must be determined by objective standards. They are based on the nature of the human person and his acts, preserve the full sense of mutual self-giving and human procreation in the context of true love. Such a goal cannot be achieved unless the virtue of conjugal chastity is sincerely practiced. Relying on these principles, sons of the Church must not undertake methods of birth control which are found blameworthy by the teaching authority of the Church in its unfolding of the divine law. D. All should be persuaded that human life and the task of transmitting it are not realities bound up in this world alone. Hence, they cannot be measured or perceived only in terms of it, but always have a bearing on the eternal destiny of men. We can begin by noting what I said before, that this kind of leaves what is illicit birth control to the teaching office of the Church, ultimately to Paul VI, who did make a very good document after the council. These two sub-paragraphs are really pointing out how all of us need to safeguard life from conception. And they mention this by talking about abortion and infanticide killing of babies who are just born, abortion killing babies before they were born. This has been explicit church teaching from the Didache, which is just before 100. Most estimates put it 90 to 100 AD, so right around the same time as the last books of the New Testament. And it's also implicit in the Old Testament and the New Testament. We can't kill babies by abortion. We can't kill them after they're born. And we need to realize that sexual acts may result in reproduction. This is just the nature of the sexual act. When a couple loves and has sexual activity, in this mutual self-giving, they need to be open to transmitting life. That is an intrinsic part of that. Now, obviously, if a couple is 75 years old, it's pretty well known that women that age cannot get pregnant, or things like that. Also noted in these two subparagraphs, the idea of marital chastity. This may seem like a contradiction, as our usual definition of chastity is no sexual activity. However, by definition, celibacy is no sexual activity. I take a vow as priest, as a religious, I am celibate. I do not have any sexual activity. But chastity is the right use or right ordering of the sexual faculties. So a couple is using their sexual faculties right, having sexual activity between them in a loving and caring way. In a time with both consent and when they're open to children, open to that deeper unity that can bring in a marital relationship. Finally, 51D talks about how respect for human life has eternal consequences. This is really a reminder that what we talk about here and what we do here in this world has consequences for the hereafter, has consequences for our eternal destiny. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we'll continue with the next paragraph of Gaudium Spes. That's paragraph 52 on the family teaches humanity, which is the last paragraph in this chapter. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on this podcast, like playlists and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X. There's also an email set up for questions and comments at Vatican2@sqpn.com. And my own website, frmatthewlc.com, has a contact form.